Hi, I'm Fallon, and I'm pleased to be mixing it with you today. I've got some questions in a pot, and I'm going to read them out and start answering them. So the first one is, tell us about your recent exhibition, The Hotspot at Castor Gallery. So The Hotspot was an exhibition at Castor Gallery, which was originally based in Deptford, but is now based in Fitzrovia. And the exhibition was inspired by a Greek creation story, which saw these hybrid people climb up Mount Olympus to shower Zeus with gifts, and Zeus became kind of so scared of what it was that they were doing that he threw lightning bolts at them to disperse them off the mountain. And I decided to, I suppose, begin writing a second part of that story in which these people have to locate one another again. And the exhibition itself, I suppose, became, a little bit like a love story, in which the objects in the room, like the sculptures and the wallworks, were the objects that these people would use in order to bring themselves together again. And it wasn't until after the exhibition that I realised this kind of, I don't even know if it's like a phrase, but like the politics of two-ness. So everything kind of had a pair, and I think that stems back from an exhibition I did a few years ago, which kind of was again loosely based around quantum physics, and it spoke about supersymmetry and basically every single thing in existence having a partner atom. And I think that's one of those things that is kind of, from doing that show at the Turnpike a few years ago, it's kind of subconsciously always been at the forefront of what I'm doing. Do you have a go-to material or tool that you use in your studio or making? Jesmonite has always been a thing that I've used. So Jesmonite is a material that's a little bit like plaster, but it has a plastic polymer in it. So when you mix it together, it kind of goes through that chemical reaction where it heats and then cools down. But because it's got a plastic polymer in it, it means that it sets a lot more stronger and it's less brittle. It means that you can layer it with fiberglass, and you can work quite large without it without having much weight. But this is one of the, so it's hollow. That's made out of Jesmonite. And yeah, so like everything is always kind of based or predominantly made through casting. I think that's probably based on the artists that I've always been really inspired by, like artists from the 60s. And Jesmonite was a product that came about just after the 60s. And in terms of a tool, I would say probably I use a chop saw quite a lot. Like a lot of the molds that I make have to be kind of so specific, and the good thing about a chop saw is obviously you can adjust the back, so you can basically cut things at different angles, and that means it kind of slots really well without any edges basically being visible. Pick another one. What do you enjoy doing in your spare time? I'm very fortunate in the sense that my practice is my job, and it doesn't necessarily feel like a job. Obviously at times it can, but generally speaking, like it's something that I'm always doing, if that's whether it's researching or reading, watching videos that I suppose somehow relate to it, but then also like I really, when I get the chance to do it, I really enjoy cooking. But then again, like when I look back on that, like it's also another form of making, and I think there's something quite cathartic, similarly to like sculpture production, in terms of the process of it. It's quite cathartic. Yeah, go for another one. The first piece of artwork I ever made or remember making. The first piece of art I can't actually remember ever making, but I can remember the first piece of work that I ever made that were kind of like the eureka moment. So I went to a university at Manchester Metropolitan thinking that I was going to go into it and be a painter because that's what I'd done on my foundation. But like prior to that, at A-level, I was kind of playing around with different things like sculpture and painting and print. But yeah, I kind of went in thinking that I knew exactly what it was that I was going to do. And we did these rotation groups, and the final rotation that we had was sculpture, and we had to make go-karts. And again, there was something, I mentioned in the other question about this idea of something being quite cathartic, that I got such satisfaction out of physically making something. And when we were making these go-karts, there was some chicken wire, and I don't know, like my first instinct was to start making these kind of like biomorphic forms that would then form the back of the go-kart. I suppose to make it more biomorphic. And then after that I went on a university trip to Berlin, and I think it was at the New National Gallery that I saw these sculptures that were made by Anna and Bernard Bloom. And it wasn't until much later that I realised a lot of them were reproductions of Jeanne Arp. So like these really metamorphic or biomorphic forms that were kind of really fluid-like, but also really hard because they were carved out of stone. And then when I got back, I started kind of playing around with chicken wire, and I was in the plaster workshop and I was using scrim, like Hessian, onto the chicken wire, and then just layering it up with plaster, and then just gradually bit by bit carving it back, so it kind of created these really lovely forms. But I was more interested in rather the form of them, I suppose, what they meant metaphorically. So I was kind of looking at them in like an anthropomorphic sense. And in Germany I found this essay that was an exhibition. It was called Metamorphic Others and Nomadic Beings, and it spoke about the process that people go through, and by doing so they kind of naturally grow and start to change. And I think I saw this correlation between these kind of biomorphic forms and this idea of people progressing through life, and I suppose like through society, and gradually they start to change. And yeah, that was kind of the underpinning of kind of where it's all gone to. Fourth one. Which 3 galleries do you think are creating the best projects? Obviously, first I'm going to say Castor Gallery, because obviously I just worked with them. And I think one of the great things about Castor Gallery is the owner, or the director as you want to call him, used to also be an artist. So I think that kind of approach to exhibition making, but actually the exhibition being an entity in its own right, as opposed to just the works that go on a white wall. And he's great in that, and obviously he was really good, but he's really hands-on in terms of the making, and I think he really understands that other aspect of the artist's work in the sense of process, and also all the artists that he works with, I absolutely love all of their work. A second gallery, it was Jeffrey Deitch Gallery, and it was based around a YouTube documentary that I watched about him, in which he was kind of going into all these artist studios, and he was obviously being shown the work that he thought that the artist wanted him to see, but always kind of lingering in the background was work that he could tell that they were probably more interested in pursuing, but I suppose from a financial aspect and a sales aspect, they thought that they had to play a little bit safe, and he basically decided to give a series of artists, I don't know how long the span of it was, but he decided to give them a certain amount of money to basically produce the exhibition that they wanted to make, that they envisioned was kind of being like the pinnacle of what their practice is. And I think that that's such like a fantastic way of kind of nurturing what things can be. And again, in like a similar way with Andy and Castor Gallery, I think that there's some similarities in the sense that regardless of how adventurous or even abstract that the exhibition is that you propose, like there's always some leeway in the sense of actually it's not that much of a distant dream. Like there is some aspect of it that can be turned into a reality. And then the third gallery that I love the program of, I don't know if I'm going to say a third. They're the two that kind of massively stick out for me, as well as the other galleries I've worked with before. So a Richard Heller gallery in LA I just did an exhibition with, and Duvet Berlin. So the owner of that and director is Alex Duvet, and maybe I'll say him as the third just purely because it was the first gallery that I ever worked with, and it was also a project that happened in lockdown, so it was just a nightmare for it all to kind of happen in that period, but we managed to work our way through it, and we were really happy with what we came out with. And the final one, what inspires you in your practice? The what that inspires me is thinking about space, so like spatial dynamics, thinking about room typologies. This is at the minute, like the practice is kind of shifting, and I'm about to go on a bit of a period of, I suppose, research and making again. But space and typologies and our relationship with objects and the way that we interact with them and the way that we perceive them and the way that we're able to identify our surroundings based on an object which dictates the way that it's received or the way that it's used. And in terms of who inspires me, the main two that have always been the same for like a very long time is Matthew Barney and Robert Gober. Matthew Barney, just purely because the materiality that he uses is at times that's so abstract, like making sculptures that are made out of Vaseline and kept in huge fridges. And then Robert Gober, I think, not only because there's similar interests, I suppose, in terms of what our practice is and like where our interests lie, but again, his approach to actually the physical making, like he's a sculptor, like a sculptor with a capital S, because he doesn't buy objects and then fluffs them up. He creates them as a core thing. So again, like how I said about the first piece of work I ever made, like he still uses a lot of chicken wire, plaster and Hessian, and then there's a lot of carving and sanding back and then painting. I've only ever seen his work in a group show. I've never seen the actual works altogether, but I imagine it's probably one of those exhibitions that you walk in and you can smell like house paint, and like enamel paint that are kind of put on all these works. And I imagine that when you can look close, you can kind of see little nicks that are in the surface. And I think there's something about that, like especially the way that art is going at the minute in terms of using, say, 3D printing or VR headsets. Like, I think gradually through time, things will start to lose like the handmade aspect. And I think he's one of the artists that, for me, will maintain that for as long as he's alive and for as long as his work are kept in collections. But yeah, I think that is all of the questions. And you can find me at, my Instagram is at lfallon, so LFALLON. Thank you.